All right, hi everybody. Welcome to the Burning Man Camp Symposium breakout session on power, where our goal today is to discuss how to use less while living large. My name is Ken Rehor. I'm a 5-time burner and member of the Renewables for Artists team and Camp with Daydream. We're going to talk about a number of really great topics today. The goal is for all of you camp leads to be able to come away from this session with some actionable items that you can apply to your camp this year. We have presentations by some great burners that have what I call real playa experience. We're going to talk about what they've actually done on playa and how you can apply that to your camp this year. So the idea is how do we reduce power usage while maintaining a quality of life and interactivity? Sustainable power is a big part of that. We want to be able to minimize our carbon footprint, learn from these real playa examples related to lighting, kind of basic needs, lighting, refrigeration, water, better living through like ventilation, air conditioning, transportation, community building, music, and so forth. And then how to apply this to your camp this year. We've got a number of great speakers today. We just go through this briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. So the idea here is we have a lot of material to cover in the time. What we want to do is give you all a taste of what's possible and what you can do from these folks who have actually done it on playa. So first, we're going to have Bruce Cooper and Doug Hansen are going to talk about how to actually estimate your power requirements, measure your actual use, and actually do some calculations in real time. And Bruce and I are going to talk about kind of the elephant in the room, which is generators. We know that generators are not what we really want out there. Our goal is to get rid of all generators on playa, but how do we minimize our carbon footprint by using better generators and optimize what we're doing with generators, and then how we can do hybrid to reduce the carbon footprint from generators on playa and start to transition to solar, and as we like to call it, to take a bite of the apple to reduce usage. Doug Hansen and Dave Johnson are going to talk about their camp experience powering their camps completely with solar. Doug has a great example of a very small camp of 4 people, and Dave Johnson has a really great example of a big camp of 48 people completely on solar power. Stephen Queen is then going to talk about his experience on playa of using wind power. With all the wind we have on playa, we get a lot of questions about that, and he's going to be able to talk about the pros and cons of wind generation on playa. And then we'll have George Reed, who is with the Burning Man Project. He leads the off fossil fuels program, so known as OFF, and what the Burning Man Project is doing for with sustainable energy on playa. We'll have some time for some open discussion and questions, and we have some links for you to be able to get involved. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce.
All right, Ken, thank you. I'm going to talk about load analysis for your camp. You can also find this on on Burning Man Hive, how to do a camp electrical load analysis. If you haven't checked out Hive, please do. They're doing great things. So what is a load analysis? It's an inventory of all things electrical, things that you operate in your camp and in your home. Here's an example of my kitchen at home. I've done my whole house. I was able to save a couple $100 a year, pay for my upgrades to make my house more efficient, and reduce my carbon footprint by over 1,900 pounds of CO2. So why do this? Well, ultimately, it's to reduce our carbon footprint. Also, it identifies inefficiencies, and you will also use this to calculate the size of your wind and solar system. You need math. You got to do math. You got to do this work in order to size it correctly. Same with the generator and inverters. You can use this information for that. And then, of course, it helps you become electrically aware and help your campmates become electrically aware, because you got a finite amount of energy that you can use or power that you can use. So becoming electrically aware is really important. What information are we looking for? We're trying to capture description, quantity, hours of operation per day, volts and amps. But what's really critical, what we're looking for is watts. Ultimately, we're solving for watts. And a watt is a unit of power. Just to give you a point of reference, 8 100-watt light bulbs is equal to 1 horsepower. The other value that we're going to be looking for is watt hours. And this is very simple. A watt hour is a rate of energy transfer. But of importance is to know that it's very simple. Watt hour. So if you have 100 watts and you run it for 1 hour, that's 100 watt hours. If you run it for 2 hours, that's 200 watt hours. Simple, don't sweat it. Okay, so how are we going to find this information? Well, nameplate data is a starting point. All electrical devices have some sort of sticker, plate, embossing of some sort that will have the information that you need. Here we have a light bulb. It already tells us it's 15 watts. Our job is done. We can go home. We got the information we need. So the downside of nameplate data is it's going to show you the max values that that device is going to operate at, not necessarily what it normally runs at on a regular basis. So you have other tools that you can use: a watt meter, multimeter, amp clamp, and a DC shunt meter. Those are tools that you can that can help you get this information. One of the easiest ways for AC is the watt meter. Very simple. You plug it into an outlet, you plug your device you want to test into that watt meter, and it will record the information that you need to do an inventory. Piece of cake. Another one. The other side of it is math. Math is very much a part of doing this inventory, but you're only dealing with Watt's law. Very simple. Volts times amps equals watts. The math is simple. Trust me. And here is a electrical inventory that I created. You can find this on the links that will be passed out here shortly. And in this case, I recommend putting a date on it so that next year you can compare what you did the year before and see where your growth is and where your problem areas might be. Let's look at the first line. Here I have incandescent bulbs. I looked at the nameplate and it said that it was AC for 120 volts. We would normally multiply that by the amps, but the nameplate doesn't have amps, but it does have watts. On the bulb, we've all seen it. It says 100 watts. We have 10 of these devices. We're going to multiply that together. We're going to end up with 1,000 watts. If we use that column of watts, we can size our generators, and also it'll help you identify what you need for your inverters. And then we take it a step further, and we want to know what the watt hours are for our solar and our wind systems. Here we multiply the watts times the hours of operation. Another piece of cake right there. And then we convert it over into the kilowatt hour. The reason why you do that is your house, you're charged by the kilowatt hour, but you will also use that value for your math for solar and wind. And let's take a look at that number that we generated on the incandescent bulbs. It says 10 kilowatt hours. That's ridiculous. There should be no incandescent bulbs on the playa. That's my take on it. If you look down below one line, you'll see that it shows 1.4 kilowatts for LED bulbs of the equivalent wattage, so or equivalent luminescent. So just to show you what you can do with something like this, and my time is up. So thank you for your time, and back to you, Ken.
Thank you, Bruce. Next up, we're going to transition this to Doug, who's going to actually show you how to actually do these calculations.
All righty. Get myself fired up here. Can you folks see this spreadsheet?
Good.
Yes? Yes? I can't hear anybody.
Yes.
Okay, great. So Bruce in this example is my hypothetical campmate, and he ran around and took all this inventory, which is great. And he showed you a slide that said that you need to learn some math. Well, I'm going to help you out here a little bit, and you don't have to do so much math. This is an estimator that RAT put together to help you design your system, and it kind of does most of the math for you. It looks complicated, but hopefully the bright, fancy colors distract you enough to make you feel at ease. So what we do with Bruce's numbers is we start filling in all the yellow squares in this sheet. And the sheet does two things for us mainly. One, it outputs at the very end all the stuff you need to know, how many panels, how many batteries, all the things you need to know to build this system. But the other thing it does is it allows you to run some scenarios in order to optimize or reduce the power of your system. So we're going to look at that real close. So the yellow spaces are stuff you fill in, and the blue just gets calculated in the sheet. So we're just going to assume some 12-volt batteries here. That's what we're going to use to build this system. And these are the things that Bruce said his camp is using that run off of the 12-volt batteries. So we've got some phone chargers, some iPad chargers. Some of them had nameplate watts. Other ones said how many amps, whatever. You pop in the numbers that you're given. It gives you a calculated power. And like Bruce said, hours per day that you're going to use them. You don't charge your phone 24 hours a day. You charge it for a couple hours. And it tells you how much energy usage over here on the far right you're going to have for the day. So the direct 12-volt loads that we have in this example come up to 264 watt hours. That's not a lot of power. That's pretty easily done in the camp that he wants to build here. There's a second section in this sheet for things that are running at a different voltage other than your 12 volts. You might have LED strings that run at 5 volts where you need a down converter. In this particular case, Bruce, as my inventory guy, didn't give me any of those, so we're just going to skip that section. But the next section is where the big stuff was. This was the AC loads. These are things running at 120 volts. Well, I've got a 12-volt battery, so obviously I've got an inverter in the system, or multiple inverters, changing that 12 volts into 120 volts AC. This is the common voltage where you plug stuff in. And as you can see in the example, Bruce initially told me he wanted to have 10 incandescent bulbs at 100 watts each. And if you follow the math over, just like Bruce said, that's 10,000 watt hours every day of power. And clearly that's ridiculous because you start adding it up and you drop down here and all of a sudden my system needs to produce 13,500 watt hours a day. Well, that's ridiculous. So I met with Bruce, I bought him a beer, I kind of smacked him on the head and I said, you know what? We're going to make 0 incandescent bulbs there. All right, so this is where you can run some scenarios with this spreadsheet. And I'm going to replace those 10 incandescents with 10 LED bulbs. Well, look what happened. My power requirement, my daily watt hours dropped substantially. So this is how you can use this sheet to run some scenarios and figure out how to optimize what you're using. All right, so I had 3 sections. These were the loads for running off my battery, running off 120 volts. The next section on the spreadsheet says, oh, you know what? There might be a whiteout for part of a day, and I don't want to run out of power. So I put a third of a day margin in here just for grins. Well, what happens is it takes my total watt hours for all the things above, and it margins those up for that, eventuality or that, scenario where I have a whiteout. So that provides a little margin in my system. The next section, you tell them, well, what kind of batteries I'm going to use? Well, in my case, I just plugged in some lithium iron phosphate batteries. I said, I'm going to buy the 200 amp hour rated ones and see what happens. And what it tells me is for this system to power all those things, which included a couple of e-bikes up there, I only need 2.5 of those batteries. Well, obviously I can't buy a half a battery, so it's going to be 3 batteries. But that's fine. That also gives me a little bit of margin. The next section, you tell what size panels you bought. Well, I bought 200 watt panels in this case. And there's a daily sun hours figure. And most people use 5.5 to 6 sun hours out on the playa. You can kind of ignore these efficiencies for right now, but all the efficiencies and inefficiencies are built in. And it tells me I need 7 of those panels to run this system. Okay, obviously I could use a bigger power panel and use less of them, or I could use 100-watt panels and I need 14 of them. But in any case, it tells you how many panels you need, and you can run some scenarios to determine if there's a way to reduce that. And finally, you don't even have to put any data. The bottom line here tells you how many amps your charge controller needs to be rated for to make this system work. And finally, at the very bottom here, it says, here's a nice summary. And this is your entire system in a nutshell. Your total adjusted loads, 4.15 kilowatt hours. Demand with some margin, 5.4 kilowatt hours. Batteries required, 2.5, based on what you specified up above here. 7 panels, 7.03, but 7 is close enough. And an 80 amp charge controller. So here are all the parameters of everything you need to specify to build this system. Obviously, you can also use plug and play type of devices to try and meet the needs of the system. But I wanted to show you this chart so you can see that there are scenarios you can run, and this tells you how to design your system. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Ken.
That's fantastic, Doug. Thank you very much. The link for that spreadsheet is in you can find it in the chat, but you can also find it on the renewablesforartistteam.org website or our link tree, which is also in the chat. Next up, I'm going to go turn it back to Bruce to talk about generators.
All right, give me a sec here. All right. So we're going to talk about generators. We have a love-hate with generators. You know, you pull up on the ply, you throw your generator out, you put some gas in it, you push a button, pull a cord, and off you go, right? Life is good. But with that comes a cost. You got your exhaust and your noise, you got maintenance, you got fuel issues that you got to deal with. You got a generator that can fail. We've all seen those out there, and the ply is not the place to work on a generator. And then you have your carbon footprint. And hold on. And you have your carbon footprint. So here's a form that you can use for calculating your generator's carbon footprint. For every gallon of gas that's burned on the ply, you're putting 19.6 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. And for diesels, it's 22.4 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. So there is a cost of firing up those generators. So you want to size them correctly. Generators are rated in kVA, and that deals with power factor. We're not going to go down that road. But the smaller consumer generators are going to be rated in kilowatts. And that's for the ease of the consumer to figure out and compare generators. Generators are going to have a rated load and a peak load. You run in the rated load zone. Here we have an example of 3,700 watts. That's where the generator is going to do its running. Peak is when you have spikes of current from starting up equipment, motors, that sort of stuff. And in the peak mode, you don't run there. It'll accept peaks up to a certain amount of time. There's a time base and an amplitude to that peak, all the way up to 4,500 watts in this example. If you're using the inventory sheet, you would utilize your watts and your kVA to figure out what size generator you're going to want. Consider also increasing it to 10%, 20% to deal with those voltage spikes or those current spikes, but also for growth, expansion in the future. We don't want you to expand, but you know, it happens. Also, more about generators. You want to make sure that they're CARB and EPA compliant. You don't run your car at 100%, so why would you run the generator that way? Also, generators don't like to be loosely or to be lightly loaded. You want to keep a load on them. Otherwise, you'll have fouling, you'll have fuel and oil burning unnecessarily. And also with diesel generators, you have something called wet stacking, which can create a fire. Hours of operation is another consideration. Are you going to run it for a few hours a day, or are you going to run it 24 hours? That will dictate what kind of generator that you end up with. And then let's talk about constant speed versus inverter generators. These are going to be your smaller consumer generators, 6,000 wattish and lower. With a constant speed generator, it runs at a constant speed. It doesn't matter if it's lightly loaded or fully loaded, it's going to try and run at that constant speed. Whereas an inverter generator will adjust the load. It's variable depending upon the load that it's receiving. And with this, you save fuel. Your fuel tank is going to be smaller, it's going to be quieter, and it's going to have cleaner power. Your electronics, your monitors, your motors, they're all going to appreciate the power that an inverter generator puts out. And then, but finally, though, there is a cost associated with it. They're more expensive than your standard generator. And then the question is, what about gas or diesel? Well, diesel is going to be for those large loads, those big camps out there. And we've seen them. They're all in containers, hopefully abating that noise. Gas is more plentiful. Diesel is more efficient. Gas has smaller and lighter engines, and the list goes on. But before I get off, I want to just kind of divert here and talk about smaller bite of the apple. This is a term I like to use for hybrids. And Ken's going to talk more about this too. But consider this. Take a small bite of the apple. We don't have to all be on generators all the time. Why not build or buy a charge station, or your front end lights, have those all off of solar. Take a small bite of the apple and give it a try. I don't advocate generators. I'm into solar, but this is this information. Hopefully it was helpful. Thank you. And back to you, Ken.
Thank you, Bruce. Just a couple of things before I switch to my slides. There are a bunch of questions in the chat about who to contact and so forth. We've been talking about us being, a lot of us are part of the Renewables for Artists team, and this is a camp symposium. So how does that have to do with art? Well, there's probably a 90 or more % overlap between what you need for art projects and for camps. It's just the sizing and so forth. So we are glad to help have those discussions. We have pointers to that spreadsheet and so forth. So feel free to contact us. So let me talk more about this idea of the bite of the apple. Everybody see that? I think this works. Okay. It's very simple. I mean, I'm just going to give you a couple of simple examples to think about. One is camp lighting. Here I am in 2016 or 2017, I can't remember now. 2017, putting up these canopy lights in my camp. These were all AC powered and power off our generator. But now you can just buy essentially the same thing. This little screenshot I took at Costco the other day. You can now buy solar versions of these. And actually, these were actually used out at Gerlach at some of the Burning Man properties themselves. So this is a really simple example of something that was AC powered by default before, but you can now get a very simple, inexpensive solar powered system. You can just, it's no work involved, just install them. Another idea is for personal power and lighting. So this is, you can get these little LED strings that looks similar to those previous lights, or even fairy lights if you want lighting in your tent or your RV or in a little workshop area. These can plug into a USB battery pack that you want to maybe charge your phone to take pictures, or you want to charge other devices. There's fold-up solar panels of all different sizes. There's even USB batteries with solar panels built in, but those take a long time to charge. But it's backpacks. There's off-the-shelf portable battery systems from many different vendors. So it's very easy to buy. inexpensive systems to even take a bite of the apple of your own lighting. This might also be how you power lights on your bike or on your clothing. So this is a really simple way to take a small bite of the apple for powering systems as opposed to charging batteries or buying just throwaway batteries. Another big draw is air conditioning, and we can argue about whether the legitimacy of air conditioning out on playa, but many people who work or building the city. Anyway, so we have a lot of people with air conditioning, and how do we minimize that? Well, one problem we have is just the RVs themselves. On top of all these RVs, we have 20,000 BTU or higher air conditioning systems. Some RVs even have multiple of these. We have these sorts of air conditioners even running in tents and common areas. And so what can we do about that? Well, one is, here's an example of what I did starting in 2019. In my rental RV, instead of powering the 20,000 BTU air conditioner that came on the RV itself, which is about 2,400 watts, depending on the age of the unit and how efficient they are. Instead, I bought an inexpensive window air conditioner at Home Depot, and that 5,000 BTU air conditioner ran to 3.5 amps and 420 watts, and I ran completely on solar for the entire time with a temporary solar system that I built. And we have a link to the system that I built. We'll have links on the website as well. Did a presentation at a previous symposium about that system. So it's very easy to reduce. You don't necessarily need it super cold, but this really helps a lot when it's very, very hot. And it's much more energy efficient. A key point here is cover your windows. You can see the windows that I have here. I have Reflectix, but there's lots of things you can use, but it makes a huge difference to reduce the amount of sun coming into your living quarters. What if you don't want to use air conditioning? Well, Bob Wolf is part of our team, also our chat moderator today. He built something called a Robo Swamp Cooler. There's many different swamp coolers that people have built. He did a great presentation. This video is available on Hive about what he built. And swamp coolers basically use the evaporative effect of water evaporating to a cool living space. And here's an example of his first version of the Robo Swamp Cooler and his RV last year. And one final thought: shade. Cover as much as you can with a shade structure. It reduces the amount of energy needed just from thermomechanical effects. So always keep that in mind. We have we'll have links for all of this information later, but you can always think about going to renewablesforartistteam.org. And with that, next up is I'm going to turn over to Doug to talk about how he powered his camp. It's a 4-person camp.
All righty, so here we go. You should be seeing this.
Yes, looks
Yes?
great.
All right, so a lot of people are in very large camps, and that's, a big problem to solve. It's solvable, but it's a big problem to solve. But there's also the small camp, or you can consider it a small bite of the apple, as they're saying, to start doing something with renewables. So I want to talk about my camp in 2022. So I'm not part of a big camp. I'm out in open camping. This was actually the start of my camp during Build Week. There was just 2 of us that came out to help during Build Week, and the rest of the camp showed up later. And it turned out to be a 4-person camp, but this was a picture that Ken took during Build Week of us trying to survive out there in the dust. Just a couple of tents. So I'm going to talk about this small camp situation. It was a rough start for everyone, not just us, but we still had our electrical needs during that week. And so we had 2 e-bikes out there because we needed to get around. We had 2-way radios, lights, fans, phone chargers, all the usual stuff, even though we were just in 2 little tents. The result of what happened that week, just to shift to the end, some of our mechanical systems failed. Our shade structure wound up in a heap, and one of our tents got destroyed. we all know how bad the wind was. But the electrical system worked like a champ, despite often being totally buried in dust. So I'm going to talk about that. This was the small electrical system. I know it looks pretty pitiful here, but it turns out that the flexible panels tended to take off in the wind. So for a lot of the times, I just had them laying on the playa. The good news is you could just shake the dust off, and that was an easy way to clean them. But I had the flexible panels, a couple 100 amp-hour lithium iron phosphate batteries, and a box that I made that contained all the electronics to power everything and charge everything. And it worked like a champ. It really worked well. Later during the week, things got better and better, obviously. This was our camp as the week commenced. So we had a real shade structure that actually stood up to the winds. We ran a beacon that let us find our way home all night. We had various camp lights. We wound up with 4 e-bikes and many, many other devices that we had to charge every day. Here's kind of a pictorial diagram of the electrical system that I fielded there for the camp. And again, it's not a big system. It ran off of 200 amp-hour lithium iron phosphate batteries. We had 600 watts of solar panels running into this box with charge controllers and AC inverter and all the good stuff. We were powering the beacon. We were powering various camp lights, some small music for the camp, just some, at Burning Man, as you know, you don't need to have your own music. Oftentimes your fellow community is more than happy to provide music. Might not be what you want, but we have some small music just in case. And we were powering many, many phones, fans, and all kinds of USB things, and 4 e-bikes every day. And believe me, those e-bikes got charged every single day because we were riding a lot. And the system worked like a champ. So this is what you can do with a really small system. I just want to put a plug in for a really small system. I'll call this a micro system. So I had a friend that came out in another camp, and it was just him. He was a solo camper, but I loaned him this milk crate solar generator that I had made for a completely different purpose. And it had a 100 amp-hour battery in it, all the charge controller, inverter, and all those things. And he was able to go the whole week charging his e-bike, his phones, fans, music, and general lighting for his camp as well. So it wasn't dust proof, so he had to keep it in a big canvas bag, but it worked, and it worked very well. So the summary here is that for small camps, or for just a small bite of the apple, if you will, both DIY and plug-and-play solar generators are very viable for small camps on the playa. What's critical are the things that Bruce and I talked about earlier, and that's an accurate loads inventory, so you know that it's going to work and you're not going to overpower your system. And one other final comment, I'm finally convinced that rigid panels hold up a lot better than flexible on the playa, but that's just a side note. And with that, I am going to turn it back to Ken.
Thanks, Doug. That was a great example of small systems, really small systems, one person. And those Doug built himself, but with these small systems, these are also very commonly available, just off the shelf portable battery systems you can buy online. And so go through the camp analysis, your energy analysis spreadsheet, and you might be able to just buy something off the shelf or build something yourself. Next up, we're going to turn it over to Dave Johnson, who's going to talk about his camp Solar Punks. He did a very large camp, 48 people with so all solar. So Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Ken. How are you guys? My name is Dave Johnson, like Ken said, and I'm with Solar Punks. We are kind of this like-minded community that refused to bring any gas out and decided it was time to take a shot at whether we could truly do a 100% renewable camp, and we were successful in doing that. So I'm going to show you that. I'll start with the camp layout. It was partitioned into key functional sections. The plot size was about 250 by 150 feet. And it was architected in such a way that that it promoted the idea of me being able to measure it and be able to look at this and apply it even to an individual camper. So you'll see that as I go along. So what I'm going to do within every area as well, I'll identify, the load usage for that area, and then I'll break it down into the equipment area, and then add some qualitative comments and suggestions as I go along. Like I said, I did spend a lot of time doing measurements this time around. I think that was probably the biggest benefit we've gotten out of this. And we did a pretty detailed energy study, and that's at the end of this presentation. So can everybody see this slide deck?
Yeah, looks
Yep.
great.
Okay, great. Go over. All right, here's the camp. In blue, I have basically denoted the areas. There's basically 5 to 6 areas. One to the left is the actual energy system that is sourcing the camp. Basically, we used what I'll show on the next slide. We actually used a bunch of what I'd call commercial or prosumer type gear and just architected it into a system that's side by side and intelligently made use of what Bruce and Doug were talking about as far as really, really fine-tuned load management to make sure this all worked as a system. The big areas were the dedicated, here in the 2 green tents is where I house the actual equipment that receives the regeneration energy from the solar panels. The lounge tent was really our community center and where all the music was played. We had a lot of production type people and music folks in camp, so this happened a lot. So we had a DJ booth with a Bose system. I'll get into that. The tents, the all private tents, the notable thing here is every tent was housed with an air conditioner and ended up being the dominant area to be paying attention to. The kitchen and water system was up in this area, and it was, we really did want to live large, and we wanted to get out there and be able to live as close to what we normally live like back at home with the proper things. So we brought in a commercial refrigerator, 42 cubic inch. We brought in a big chest freezer. Everything was electric, and basically every kind of piece of equipment you could have in there. I'm not showing, there was lighting throughout, and basically this LED based functional and vibe lighting, it was all LED lighting. So the next slide shows basically the left slice of the camp, and this just basically shows you what I was using. I was using a Blue Eddy system, which is their highest end modular system, or was highest end at the time, which is a 3 kilowatt inverter that has the benefit of also having a dual charge controller in it that can take up to 2.4 kilowatts. So basically the way I sectored the panels was to match those charge controllers to the panels. The panels were 400 watt REC mono panels, and you can see there are a lot of them over there. Like I said, the equipment, there were 10 of these stacks in this west shelter and 9 in this shelter. So let's get into it. The energy usage, in red here, you'll see I put them in the order of where we want to concentrate and where our real usage happened. By and by, the private shelters, people were charging their phones and things like that, but really it was dominated by the air conditioning units. And the energy shelters, I had full-time and AC into those units as well. I use 8K BTU into this section, into the private section, and 12K BTU into the energy tents. So all in all, the private shelters took 70% of our entire energy for the 8 days that I made measurements. 15% went into the energy shelters. So right there, you have 85% of the camp was air conditioning, which is a nice aha moment. The kitchen was came in second at 8%. E-bike and e-tool charging, like Doug said, there was a lot going on here, and we had visitors camp. We had one guy who he was a e-skateboard dude that was there every day, but this got a lot of use as well. That came in at 3%, and the camp audio system at 1.5%. So let me break these down. I'm just going to show another couple slides of the breakdown and try to reduce it to the equipment to give you a feel for it. And I'll comment on some of the qualitative things, like I said. So you can see over here on the left, I use these Medea AC, these U-shaped window air conditioners. What makes these nice is they're relatively lower power, and they have really good startup. So when the compressor turns on, you don't get the massive spikes, and you don't have to put any kind of extra circuitry in there. I built a plenum, so a custom plenum that went on the front of this, and we ported through these fans. We ported cold air in, and then we took the exhaust, the hot air back out. And so we had inline fans on each of these. They worked pretty well. It was a really hot year out there, and we did not try to dictate to anybody. We had very interesting mix of usage patterns on these things that went all the way from everybody using them all the time to certain people being a little more discreet about it. Like I said, the private shelters, there were 24 of those. Those 24 comprises 70%. The 2 energy shelters were really working hard as those tents got hot with both the energy systems and the playa, and they came in at 15. If you reduce it to a typical single tent usage per day, we were using about 5.7, say 6 kilovolt amps hours. I say volt amps because I'm talking about the source power. So I really am looking at the true source that we had to provide to those tents. The actual work power, as Bruce and Doug had mentioned, will be a little lower because of the inefficiencies lost in the line going to them. And that's measured in power factor. And then in the energy shelters, they were close to 12 kilovolts amps hours. The one thing that I'll note about this area is the biggest fail we had was our shading. And even if you're not going to shade yourself, any shading on the equipment is a good thing. I think just looking at lab tests versus what we really saw on the playa says that if you can shade your critical equipment, at least partially, you're going to get a lot better performance. The equipment will be happier. And so we probably wasted a lot of energy just from that perspective. Kitchen and water system is all kitchen basically. And really the 2 things that were on here were the refrigerator and the freezer. I have a little table down below that shows the what happens when the compressor is on and when the compressor is off. So basically this is an area where it's actually amazing. These chest freezers, for example, will literally go 0. And if you're really disciplined and not getting in there all the time, which was a little more difficult when you have 50 people in camp, those things will hold and you won't pull much power. So one of my big takeaways is I would never go out to the playa without a freezer now. It's just not that hard to do. And then the big refrigerator, actually, again, it's a duty cycle thing, how many times that compressor is kicking on and off. The total usage for that one per day was about 13 kilowatt hours or kilovolts amp hours. E-bike and e-tool charging. I'm just showing you a few of the bikes that we use. These were the models we had in camp. And like I said, there were other ones coming in and out. We probably did about 20-ish e-bikes here and there. And then we had a lot of worksite tools. I was there the whole week before and a good part of the week after. So those got a lot of use as well, including a pretty heavy duty 27K lumen work lamp there that pulled some power. But all that stayed up. The blowers were really for the that we used to every morning. I would blow off the panels, and that seemed to be pretty well. We had the one major Friday storm at Friday night. The following morning, Saturday, was the one morning where, I had to apply some microfiber cloth as well because it was really bad coming into Saturday morning. And again, this was about 3% of cap and about 5 kilowatt hours usage per day. And then the final slide is the camp audio system. A lot of people think audio is going to be a real dominant thing, especially if you're really pounding the speakers hard. It turns out it's not that bad. And this was easily sourced with the renewable energy. We came out with a pretty full-on pro DJ mixer set. And we had 2 of these Bose L1 Pro 16s. The other thing that I'd recommend on the audio, if you want to go big sound, is the Big Sound Box product is amazing. And basically it's just plug-in batteries, and they charge, their charge rate is only, probably, I forget how big they are, but it is not much, maybe 50 watts as it's running. So you can charge those up and you probably can run 4 to 6 hours. And so if you have a couple extra batteries, you could get by there. And again, that's 1.4%, and we use about 2.2 kilowatt hours per day. And with that, that's what I have. Like I said, there's a lot more detail, especially on the side of sizing the panels and the regeneration elements that I didn't go into here today in this study. Okay.
It's fantastic. Thanks, David. That's another great example of using off-the-shelf equipment, but in a very unique way. So that was really terrific. Okay, next up, in a completely different direction, we're going to turn this over to Stephen Queen, who's going to talk about wind power out on Playa.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Stephen Queen. I am the TCO for the Playa Penthouse Camp, and I am a technical advisor with RAT, and also RAT is really focused on why is this not going to presentation? It should. Anyways, RAT is really focused on art, but we do have camp liaisons. I am one. There are several in the organization that deal with camps, so any questions that can come through, it's kind of handy to pass those on, and we'll deal with camps separate from art. But to wind, really quickly, regardless of the size, whether you've got the huge commercial generators or there's something small for your camp, these are basically alternators, not unlike what is in your automobile charging your battery. They are basically alternators, and they produce 3-phase AC power at their head. It goes into a rectifier on these systems, so they're converted to DC power, and you can get them in various voltages, 12 and 24. Those are what I'm using in camp, and they're the propeller types. You generally want to have an odd number of blades, 3 blades, like on the bottom left. They don't really start that well in lightweight wind, but if they're really moving, they are quieter. The 11-blade fan over on the right side starts really well in less wind, but if they're really humming, if the wind comes up, they can be a little bit noisy. And fortunately, there are brakes on these things and you can turn them off, but they have to be able to spin and wind vane around so that they're pointing in the direction where the wind is coming from. There are alternatives, these vertical, like helical style, even like this little thing, a little yellow thing like an anemometer, or some are more helical, like the one that's next to it. These two on the right-hand side that's the pictures of helical that I purchased, and I'm working with this in a 12-volt system alongside my regular propeller type. The one thing about this is these really have to be perfectly balanced, like the wheels on your car. Otherwise, they just shake themselves to death because of the way they're working. But To stay with the propeller type for the moment, this is what we have in our camp. It's just a 20-foot high mast. Almost everything in camp, our tents, our shade structures and whatnot are all 10 foot. So this is 10 foot above that, which still gets pretty clear air. Like I say, these are just two pieces of 2-inch EMT conduit. I welded some tabs on to be able to put some cable stays on it. And it's just a conduit coupling in the middle. The base plate that I made, I actually fastened down to the pliatum just to make sure that it doesn't slide out from under this thing. Most of these wind generators on this small size that would be for a camp just clamp right to the top of a piece of pipe like this. This clamped on perfectly to my 2-inch conduit. I welded these tabs on. You want to weld them on low enough so that the blades of the fan don't hit the guy wires as it's spinning around. And I made this wire connection, this junction, so that I can separate these two halves and make it easier for transport. They're just two 10-foot sections, which makes it easier to move around. Setting this up is very simple with 2 people. It's not that difficult to set this up because it's still at a fairly low elevation. For our guy wires, the taller ones that are under the most load, we use these earth anchors. I just made some little custom tabs to attach the turnbuckles to them. These down here are custom little tabs that I make that I screw everything down in our camp to the playa. You can get these off the shelf. You can order these by pack from Amazon, and that's just a standard Simpson timber screw, which when it's fastened into the playa, they really hold beautifully. So here's a picture of the 3 wires coming down. That's the 3-phase AC power going into this box. It's just a box I bought at Home Depot. The box contains the rectifier, and it has this 3-position switch on the front. One of them is just freewheeling. The propeller is turning, it's not charging, it's not doing anything. The other one is actual charge, and when you turn it on, you'll see the fan sort of slow a little bit when it's under load. The 3rd position is the brake, and essentially all you're doing is shorting across the 3 phases. It doesn't stop the propeller completely, but it slows it way, way down. So if the wind really gets up, both from a noise standpoint and safety standpoint, you can really slow it down. Just put the brake on if you need to. That's just a picture of the 2 wires. That's now the DC power coming out the bottom. And this system is a 24-volt system. I'm just gathering 2 4D lead acid batteries. These are the type in an RV perhaps. And the reason I'm using these, this voltage comes in and variable voltages depending on how fast the propeller is turning, how fast the alternator is turning. And if you're using a smart battery, the BMS systems in these smart batteries sometimes get tripped up by that voltage. If it's higher than around 18 volts or so, the BMS will say, hold it, and it'll just put the battery to sleep. So I'm using a dumb battery, and both of these are hooked together in series for 24 volt, and they're a little more robust to be able to take a little bit of a spike in the voltage. And as the voltage, or as the amperage is going into the batteries, the amperage goes up, the voltage goes down. It's kind of a inverse there. So the main power comes into the circuit breaker. It goes through this normally open controller relay, which means there's no power coming out the other side, and goes straight into the battery. All this controller is doing is just measuring the voltage in the battery, and when the battery's full, it says, okay, we don't need any more juice going to the battery. So it closes this relay and sends the battery, or sends that extra voltage to your dump load. And we'll talk about that in a second. Also in my system, I've got this little 3,000 watt inverter. It goes up to a bank of outlets, which is for charging bikes. And the other side is going to our outdoor kitchen for certain of our 120 volt components. This is the back of this little thing. I've got a couple dump resistors, and all they're doing is taking the excess power and just burning it off essentially in heat energy. But it didn't make sense to me to just lose it. So what I built just a little experimental water heater, and it's got a 24 volt heater element going into the water heater. So this is heating water for our outdoor kitchen. We've got a sink in the bar, and it's heating water for the outdoor shower. This is just in test right now because our hope is this thing will just be producing hot water all day, all night, and you'll be able to mix that water and put it into our camp shower system. So some of the benefits is that, of course, it's renewable, which is great. And then it generates power at night when all the solar systems have gone to bed. And if there's wind, which there's usually some on Playa, this thing keeps powering. And again, there's another source of power on Playa besides just solar. And we want to try and maximize what we can do in order to get more renewables and less petroleum products burned on in generators on Playa. And then like this potential for the overflow power. When the batteries are charged, I want it to heat water for us. Some of the drawbacks, like I talked about, if you've got a number of blades on your fan, it can get a little noisy if the wind is really up. You've got a footprint issue for the cable bracing, but that's not unusual in a lot of camps where you're bracing your shade structures and whatnot. And of course, the Playa dust is pretty brutal on moving parts. If you're out there and you're a week of build and a week of burn, there's 2 weeks. It's not that bad on these things. And I've taken them apart. I benched this unit itself, and it's pretty easy to clean up. This presentation is actually a smaller version of what we do on the RAT page. We do a lot of skill sharpenings at our Wednesday meetings. And these are recorded and they're available on the RAT page of the Hive. And this is some of the education that Bruce and Doug and Ken were talking about. It's available not just for artists working on Playa, but for anybody and camps in particular in this symposium, that you can go onto that site and they cover all the gamut of different things from batteries and chargers to panels and wind. So these skill sharpenings are all recorded and they're available for you to find on the RAT page. And with that, thank you very much. I'll hand it back.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. That was really great. We get a lot of questions around wind, and your experience out there is terrific. We do have a link in the chat to Stephen's full presentation, but it's also, you can just find it on the Hive website. And next up, we have George Reed, who is to talk about what he's doing with the off fossil fuels program and all the other sustainable power activities at the Burning Man project. George.
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Really appreciate the introduction, and thanks for everybody for the informative presentations before. I'm looking at the clock here, Ken, and I want to make sure that the group here has some time to actually answer question or ask questions. So I'm gonna slash my whole presentation, just give you guys a quick overview. I'm George Reed. I've been burning for about a little over a decade now. I recently joined the organization last summer, so this is my first working burn and first pre-season going through all these types of informational sessions. So I am the off fossil fuels manager. So I've essentially been brought on to help support the goals of the 2030 sustainability roadmap. My primary focus has been on an initiative that we're calling Net Zero Black Rock City, and with primary focus on carbon emission reduction. We are breaking up those emission profiles into ways that we can measure. Very quickly, we have them, we'll call them scope alpha, which are things that we control. Some of you may know Burning Man project has around an 8 or 9 megawatt grid that supports all the operations, the build and the infrastructure. That's operating for anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, depending on where it is on Playa. So a lot of our efforts this year is really focused on reducing our dependence on fossil fuels there in that part of the grid, those assets that we do own and control. Another scope of emissions that we're looking at that's very relevant to this conversation is what we're calling scope beta, which are those emissions that are generated by participants. Right now, what we're really trying to do is help support those groups. I want to give a big thank you to RAT, particularly the Renewable Artists team who's leading this, but also groups like Black Rock Labs, Green Theme Camp Community, Blast. All these participant-led groups are really taking the lead here. We're hoping that the organization can really be a place to promote, help find ways for you guys to collaborate and organize and to promote what you're doing. And we actually believe that some of the most creative, inspirational ideas and the biggest solutions are going to actually come from the community like they usually do. The third scope of emissions that we're looking at are what we call scope delta, which are indirect emissions that are resulting from upstream and downstream activities, right? All the transportation, all the logistics, shipping containers and art cars. So we're also working on various initiatives to reduce those types of emission profiles, all the way from increasing our container storage program to increasing things like making it easier to use things like the Burner Express, as well as looking at other ways that we can more thoroughly handle our waste ecologically. What I'd like to do here is probably just post, I think if Breedlove's still on, hopefully you guys caught his session in the plenary. But we are going to be giving a much bigger, broader sustainability update and discussion on our activities in July. So please sign up for that. I think the best way to get information, or if you're looking to hook in with groups that are supporting these efforts, the best place now would be to sign up for the Green Theme Camp community email list. And Breedlove, if you're able to post that there for the group, that'd be awesome. And the final recommendation that I'd have is any camp is sizable, or even if you're small, we're really hoping that people put together a sustainability lead for your camp, just like you have a leave no trace lead. Even if it's just to, I forget if it was Bruce or someone earlier, so just take a bite out of the apple. Just start really starting to understand your energy needs. A lot of this stuff is energy efficiency. And so there's little things that we can do to chip away. We have a 2030 goal here. So we've got 7 years. We'd like to do it quicker, but you'd be surprised that if you chip away at little things, and just even having someone who's there focused on little standard operating procedures in your camp, little rules that you can do, little different ways that you hook things up, can start to add up and have a really big difference. So we really encourage you to appoint a sustainability lead that can start to coordinate with these groups and really help participate and lead in this area. So I'm going to stop talking now, so we've got a couple minutes, but it's nice to meet you all, and really appreciate everybody spending their time here on a Saturday focused on these things, and look forward to all we're going to do together.
George, thank you very much. That was a terrific summary of the Burning Man Project's activities and what you've been doing and what others have been doing. Definitely would encourage. I see Breedlove added the links to the chat. We'll make sure that we have all this available. We're going to make sure we post this. The recordings and slides will all be posted at some point. We'll have links from the Renewables for Artists team website as well for we have a lot of this already there. We'll have it on our website, as well as it'll be in Hive. I think we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to open it up to discussion. We still have a few minutes left. So, but I think the idea of, because a number of the questions that are in the chat were about new camps that are going to looking at solar. They're looking at getting a large generator. What should they do? Actually, we were going to take a poll question. Let me try a poll question here. Are you going to, who's been using solar? We'll start using solar. Thinking about solar, do not want to use solar. Let's see. Let me see if I can relaunch the poll. Let's do a poll question. See if we can answer that while we're talking here. This idea of, even for like new camps, somebody in the chat was saying they're looking for a large generator. Or let's see, what are recommendations for people that are practically use generators of 3,000 to 6,000 watts. There's also another question that camp needs about 3,000 to 5,000 watts. What brand of generator? We're trying to stay away from recommending specific products, but we know that's also an interest. We want to share what people have experienced out on Playa. One of the important things is, when you are looking at even something like 3,000 to 5,000 watt generator, really take a look at a solar system, because it's really becoming economical. As somebody else pointed out in the chat, the cost of them renting a generator went up in 2022 by, I think it was several fold. Plus there's the aspect of managing fuel, getting fuel, and so forth. So renewables, whether it's solar or wind or some combination, is becoming more economically viable, partly because of the cost of dealing with fossil fuels, as well as the cost of lithium batteries have really dramatically dropped. When I first built a system in 2019, the the power density and the price factor is down by probably at least half, if it's not a third of what I paid in 2019. So, all right, the results of the first poll. Thankfully, nobody is saying they do not want to use solar. 32% saying they have been using solar, 27% will start using solar, and 41% are thinking about using solar. So that's terrific. Thank you. Let's see. Anybody else that's on our group can please chime in here. I'm just going through the questions. Thanks again to Valkyrie, who's our tech manager for this, tech moderator for this session. She's making sure all of this whole session is working, and Bob Wolf is managing all of the chat questions here. Daylight hours. Bring this to the calculators of Doug and Bruce, but there was a mention of 5.5 hours versus somebody else mentioned about 6 hours. Doug, or Bruce, you want to talk about that?
I can take that. So this is Doug. So obviously the sun intensity rises gradually over throughout the day and then fades at night. And unless you're good at calculus, it's kind of hard to use that and figure out how much power you're getting. So there's a proxy for that called sun hours. Okay, and it's very common in the whole solar industry. And what sun hours means is what is generally the equivalent number of full power hours, not the actual, but the equivalent of full power hours you're going to get from the sun based on your latitude, based on your time of year. That's called sun hours. And out on the playa, I mean, it's a debated topic, but if you're conservative, you use 5.5. If you're feeling lucky, you might use 7. But, generally 5.5 to 6 sun hours is what's used in the calculations. How's that?
That was great. Thank you.
Can I throw out there
Yep.
as well?
Please.
I've used 5.5 for years, and last year we switched over to 6, and we had the dust storms. And
Exactly.
I think what or at least I'm going to do, is go back to 5.5.
Yep.
It's conservative and it doesn't hurt, other than panels.
It's a big plug, no pun intended, to the to Doug's solar calculator, because we use that for example, the power system we used, that we designed and deployed for the temple. It was the first time we had solar power for the temple, and we used 6 hours for our calculations. Fortunately, we also ended up over paneling and overpowering from a battery standpoint. We had extra capacity from batteries. We also ended up buying extra solar panels even beyond our calculations. And by the end of the week, when we took the system down, we were at 3%. And it was because with the incredible dust storms we had out there. So you can never have, I think, too much power out there, but I mean, it's a cost trade-off. And the only reason we were able to even buy extras is because it happened to be the day that I ordered our system, it was on sale, and I was able to actually, so much on sale, we were able to order an extra battery, and it's a couple of extra panels. So definitely take into account extra capacity because of the dust storms. Let's see. There was a question about starting a new camp and wondering if it's a good idea to rent one big diesel generator or maybe 2 9,000 watt generators for the camp rather than having 10 to 13 individual smaller generators. Definitely these small generators tend to be very polluting and inefficient. Some of the smaller high quality ones can survive, but generally these larger generators, my own camp, we used to have 10 or 11 very large generators. We have a very big camp, and we switched to a CAT generator, and the power efficiency, the fuel efficiency, and the emissions are lower than the smaller generators, just simply because of the governmental requirements and the way that they're designed, as Bruce talked a lot about. So that's definitely something to take into account. And I would also just reinforce this whole, what we've been talking about, the bite of the apple. when you're doing your power calculations for your camp, go back to Doug's spreadsheet and Bruce's energy analysis. Think about what you can actually just not put on solar or not put on the generator. Like, where can you do solar power?
Hey, Ken, this is Doug. Can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
It's very common for people to say, hey, I'm currently using a 5 kilowatt generator. Can I replace that with solar? And the question is not exactly the right question. The question is, do you know what you really need to power? And can you power that with solar? Okay. Replacing generators is not the right answer, because oftentimes the generators are producing way more power than you're actually using. So to replace that means that you're wasting a lot of money. And yeah, it's probably way expensive to just replace a generator. But if you really look at the power you're consuming, that's the way to look at this problem.
And how much power you can reduce.
Right.
Reducing is key. It is very much so. And when you start using Doug's spreadsheet, the beauty of it is you can play with the numbers and see how ridiculous your numbers are or how reasonable your numbers are. And a lot of times when we're working with artists, they start off with grand ideas. And then once they start working with the calculator and doing the math, you start seeing, okay, we need to reduce this, because you can do anything with solar panels. We have solar farms, they're powering houses and businesses and all that. So you can do anything you want, but you got money, and do you have real estate for the panels? Okay. And that's what happens when we start talking about replacing the generator. Don't think of replacing the generator, think of powering your load. Okay.
Just a few seconds left. One last question regarding panels and direction, the flat versus optimizing angle and direction. We do have actually, we have a skill sharpening session on panels and all of that. Feel free to look for that on Hive. We have a bunch of experience with having them flat. Sometimes you have to dust them more frequently. But on the other hand, sometimes getting them high and building solar shade structure. We've had a lot of discussion about solar shade structures as well. And everything that you have that's flat, like a container or a trailer, it would be a really great place to put solar panels.
Ken, if I can add to that.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so if I can add to that, generally, kind of the factor that people use for flat versus optimally pointed is you're only going to do about 85% flat of what you would do if they were pointed optimally. So that's just a kind of rough and tough rule of thumb.
I'll say
I would also point out that tilt angle, if you're going for that max burn, we've been using 31. There's been discussion on what the right panel angle is. And don't forget, you want to also be pointing due south. That's the other consideration. Flat, though, works. It's just that you're not going to get the max burn out of the panels.
I might say one other thing that I found, like we did 35 degrees, pretty much due south. Interesting in the playa that time of year, afternoon sun, you do lose some afternoon as the arc goes behind. And one trick thing that I was thinking of experimenting with going in the future, and you'll see this in some utility fields if you're out, driving through the Mojave or any of the deserts, is where they have certain sets in a different direction to capture afternoon as well. So that's if you want to eke as much out of it, I don't think the angle is as much as just making sure there's sun hitting some part of the face. Can I also say one other thing? I was muted and trying to get in before when we were talking about generators versus the alternative, the renewable. Another way to really look at this is, I'm pretty much a zealot on not using generators. So I'm always looking, I think you should always start with how can I do this without the generator? The problem is The generator is an easy thing to think about because it's a one-way system, basically. You've got the power, you probably have way more power than you need. It's sourcing, and when you run low on gas, you just fill up the gas tank. Once you do a renewable system, you're in a closed loop system. So it's not only, maybe a good way for people to think about it is there's the inverter that is basically what the generator is doing. And then there's the batteries, which is your gas tank in those generators. And you need to think about both. So typically, most people are not going to have inverter problems. You can, like I did a bunch of these little inverters, made them into big ones. If I would have had a single inverter, I could have gone half the inverter size and the camp would have worked. However, if I calculate my loads and I really look at what I'm using per day and therefore how much I need to store and get back into those batteries to go the next day, that then sets how much battery you need. So, and that's where people, it's a little harder problem, but it's a two-step problem. One is you start with, I like to start with how much energy do I need to store? And then I look at the peaks along the way of what the power is, and that really will set your generator. So just a thought for you.
We're a little over time, but I really appreciate all of the presenters. I appreciate especially all of the participants who asked a lot of great questions. We'd really like to keep this dialogue going. Feel free to contact us at the Renewables for Artists team. There's, again, because even though RAD is focused on artists and art, but there's so much expertise that we've managed to collect, both in content that you can watch on Hive and our website, but also join our activities. You can go to the renewablesforartiststeam.org and see about when we meet weekly, and you can contact us there or join us. And we really appreciate the interest in moving to adopting and renewable energy on Playa and beyond and into the default world. So we hope that you've all learned something from this, and we really would love your participation. Join our activities and let's do more out there. Thanks, everyone.